What if the child you took in had no name on record, no trace in any system, and a silence deeper than words could explain? In this heart-wrenching and healing story, a struggling single dad opens his door to a quiet girl who appears in the snow outside his cabin. She doesn't speak, she doesn't run, and she doesn't exist, at least not on paper. But what begins as an act of instinct becomes a journey of rediscovery, protection, and unconditional love. Through silent notes, broken systems, and the rebuilding of a forgotten greenhouse, two souls, both erased in their own ways, find a reason to stay. This is not just a story about a missing child, it's a story about belonging, healing, and the quiet power of being seen. The first snow of the season came without sound. Just a hush that seemed to press against the cabin, as if winter itself had paused to listen. Owen Walker stood on the porch, his hand wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, steam barely rising. The air bit at his knuckles, but he didn't flinch. Cold never bothered him much. Not after the kind that crept in from the inside. Behind him, the old radio crackled with static. He hadn't turned it on in weeks. What was the point? The news never reached this far into the woods. That was the point of the place, to be out of reach. But the wind stirred, and the broken slats in the fence near the tree line rattled like a whisper with no voice behind it. His eyes drifted to the gap, always the same gap, just wide enough for something small to pass through. He'd meant to fix it once, but life had a way of piling up things that were easier to ignore, and until now, nothing had ever come through it. Today, something did. She wasn't running, she wasn't crying. She was just there, a little girl standing barefoot in the snow, her tangled hair stiff with frost, a blue sweater hanging from her shoulders like it had been borrowed from a bigger child, or maybe a ghost. She didn't blink, just stared at him. Owen blinked for her. For a moment, he wondered if she was a memory breaking loose from the fog, some unfinished dream that had wandered out of sleep. But then she shivered. He set the mug down, careful not to spill. "Hey there," he called softly, voice low and even, like approaching a deer that might bolt. "You okay?" No answer, not even a flinch. Just eyes, wide and hollow, watching. "You lost?" he asked, stepping off the porch, his boots crunching in the snow. She didn't move, but her arms tightened around herself, not from instinct. He knew that posture. That was practice. That was learned. He stopped a few feet away and knelt, lowering himself to her level without reaching. "It's cold," he said, "and I've got a fire going inside." Her gaze didn't leave him, but something in her shoulders loosened. She took a step, just one, and that was enough. Inside, the cabin felt smaller with her in it, like silence had taken on a new shape and was now curled on his couch, wrapped in one of Lila's old blankets. He set a bowl of oatmeal on the coffee table in front of her. She didn't touch it, just sat there, legs tucked up, staring into the fire like it held the answer to something she wasn't sure how to ask. "What's your name?" he asked, gentle. No response. "You live around here?" Silence. "Are your parents, are they looking for you?" She blinked. Once, that was all. Owen didn't press. He knew the difference between silence that was stubborn and silence that was survival. Lila had gone quiet like that too. After her mother died, it was months before she spoke again. And when she finally did, curled against his chest, her breath hitching between words, she had whispered, "I don't want to disappear." And then the court made sure she did. He hadn't heard her voice since. Maybe that's why he didn't call anyone now, not the sheriff, not child services, not yet. Maybe he wasn't protecting the girl. Maybe he was protecting himself from the sound of her being taken away. That night, after she'd fallen asleep curled into the couch cushions, Owen walked quietly to the old cabinet and retrieved something he hadn't touched in years. It was Lila's music box. Faded wood, the winding key rusted just enough to squeak. He didn't wind it, he just placed it on the table beside the girl. A quiet offering, a small memory. Then he left a notebook beside it. First page blank, pencil sharp. He wrote one line across the top. If you want to say something without speaking, you can write it here. She didn't move. But just before Owen turned off the lamp, he noticed the pencil had shifted, and at the bottom of the page, in careful, uneven strokes, a single word had been written: safe. Morning came softly, slipping between the trees like a whisper unsure of its welcome. Inside the cabin, the fire had dimmed to embers, but the warmth lingered, held in thick wool blankets and the faint scent of cinnamon from a pan. Owen forgot to scrub the night before. She was already awake. Juniper, because that's who she was now, whether she'd agreed to it or not, sat on the rug near the hearth, wrapped in the same blanket. Her knees were drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the flickers of flame like they were telling a story she didn't have words for. Owen stood quietly in the kitchen, watching her in profile. Even in stillness, she looked like she might vanish if the room got too loud. "Morning," he said gently, his voice still lined with sleep. She didn't answer, but she tilted her head, just slightly, enough. He cracked 2 eggs into a pan, added toast to the stovetop griddle. No music, no radio, just the soft hiss of butter and fire. When the food was ready, he set the plate down on the table with quiet care. "It's not much," he said, "but it's warm." Juniper rose without a word. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She approached the table like someone walking through a museum of fragile things. She picked up the fork. Ate. Owen said nothing more. He knew the weight of that gesture. Acceptance, even if temporary. After breakfast, she stood by the frosted window, tracing circles into the glass with her breath. Outside, the snow was untouched except for the 2 sets of prints leading from the woods. Her eyes drifted to the broken fence line. Then, without looking at him, she asked with her fingers, drawing 3 lines on the fogged pane, then wiping them away. "What would you like me to call you?" Owen asked, stepping closer. She didn't shrug. She didn't shake her head. She just waited. "There was a flower that used to grow right outside that fence," he said quietly. "Showed up every year, even when nothing else did. It was stubborn, bright, a little wild. It was called Juniper." She turned to look at him, and in that glance something settled. Not full agreement, not ownership, but permission. That afternoon they drove into town. Owen bundled her in an oversized jacket, one of his old flannels tied at the waist to keep the cold out. She didn't speak, but she didn't resist either. They stopped at the general store. Juniper hovered by a rotating stand of postcards, letting her fingers drift across images of lighthouses and moose and old railway bridges. Owen asked quiet questions at the counter. No reports, no missing children. At the diner, he spoke to Claire. "Anyone mention a kid turning up missing? 8 or 9, maybe?" Claire frowned. "Number why?" "Just curious." His smile didn't reach his eyes. He didn't go to the sheriff. Not yet. Back at the cabin, Juniper sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, sketching on the back of an old receipt. Her crayon wandered in slow, focused motions. Owen stood in the doorway, drying his hands, watching. The drawing wasn't pretty. It wasn't meant to be. A house without windows, a basement door, a mattress with no sheets, a figure, curled, small, beneath a table. He didn't ask. He just made cocoa, 2 mugs, extra marshmallows. That night she fell asleep in the loft again, tucked beneath the thickest quilt he had. Owen climbed up the ladder just to check. Her hands were balled beneath her chin. The pencil from the notebook rested beside her, uncapped, as if she'd written something and erased it. He left a second note on the nightstand. "You don't have to tell me where you're from. Just know this. No one will take you away tonight." Downstairs, the fire had burned low. He added another log and sat back in the chair Lila once curled into while reading picture books. He didn't mean to remember, but he did. Lila had once drawn a sunflower in the margins of every book she read. He looked toward the table, where Juniper's music box now sat beside the notebook. She hadn't touched it since he placed it there, but neither had she moved it away. Some objects don't need to be opened to be heard. They just need to be seen. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the floor like honey. Owen rubbed his eyes and stretched, and saw her at the table, the notebook open. She'd written something new. "Thank you for not asking." And below that, in smaller, tighter letters, "He always asked first, before he hurt me." Owen sat down slowly, folding the page between his fingers like it might break if he breathed wrong. He looked at her. Her hands were folded, her eyes watching, and he said the only thing that felt true. "No one will ever hurt you here, not ever again." She didn't cry, but she reached for the music box, not to open it, just to place her hand on top. And for now, that was enough. The sky turned silver gray, the kind that made the whole world feel paused, as if something sacred were about to be remembered. Inside the cabin, Owen washed dishes one by one, letting the warm water soak into his fingers. He kept glancing toward the corner shelf, where Juniper stood, running her small fingers across the spines of old books. She didn't pull one out, just let her hand move from title to title, like she was listening for a story that had once called her name. He dried his hands, walked over quietly. "You ever read The Secret Garden?" he asked. She turned, curious. The question felt like a gentle breeze through heavy air. "Bit old," he added with a shrug. "But it's about a girl who finds a place that shouldn't have grown. And somehow, it does." Juniper reached for the book, but before she opened it, she wrote a question on a slip of paper. Was she alone? Owen didn't answer right away. He just sat down beside her and said, "She was." Until she wasn't. That afternoon, they sat side by side on the couch, the book between them. Owen read quietly, pausing often to let Juniper's eyes catch up. She didn't speak, but she traced each word with her fingertip, like touching truth could make it stay. At one point, she wrote something and slid it toward him. Words feel safe when no one can twist them. Owen stared at it for a long time. Then he turned to a page in the book, underlined a sentence, and nudged it back. "Where you tend a rose, a thistle cannot grow." She read it once, then again, and beneath it she drew a tiny rose in the corner margin, its roots shaped like a question mark. That evening, after she'd gone quiet again upstairs, Owen opened the cedar box buried beneath his closet floor. Inside, a photograph of Lila in oversized rain boots, her smile wide and crooked, a birthday card she'd made with one crayon color because the others had dried out, a folded paper sunflower she once taped to the fridge, and a hospital bracelet with her name, Lila Ann Walker. He held the bracelet for a while, not for the memory, for the silence that followed it. Later, Juniper wandered into the room. She saw the photo on the table and stopped, then looked at him. She stopped talking too, Owen said, not looking up, when her mother passed, for a long time. He didn't cry. He just released the air from his lungs like it carried something too heavy to say aloud. Juniper sat beside him. Didn't ask, didn't comfort. She reached for a blank page and drew two hands, one large, one small, holding a sunflower between them. Below the image, in faint pencil, "Some flowers need help standing." Owen nodded, though his throat tightened. He didn't want to be someone who buried things anymore. The knock came just after sunrise. He knew the sound. Owen stepped onto the porch to find Sheriff Lang, his boots dusted with frost, hat in hand. "You mind if we talk?" Lang asked, his tone cautious. "I mind if we do it inside," Owen replied, firm. Lang nodded. "Fair." There was a long pause before he continued. "We got a call. Said there might be a girl out here matching a recent placement, 8 years old, possibly under a false name." Owen didn't flinch. "Who called it in?" Lang hesitated. "Can't say." "You mean you won't?" The sheriff looked toward the woods. "Owen, I know your history. I know how much you lost, and I'm not here to take that from you again." Owen stiffened. "She's safe," he said, steady as the snow around them. "I believe you," Lang said quietly, "but that might not be enough on paper." A long silence stretched between them. Lang added, "The man she was placed with, Darren Pike, he's got a record. Clean, technically, but something's always off." Owen's jaw tightened. "You're saying the system gave her to a ghost and now wants her back just because he signed the right line?" "I'm saying," Lang answered, "if she's here, we need to know." Owen stepped forward, eyes level. "She's not going anywhere, not without a fight." Lang met his stare, then nodded once. "I'll file for a delay, but it won't last forever." When the sheriff's truck finally disappeared down the road, Owen turned to see Juniper in the doorway. She wasn't crying. She wasn't afraid. But in her hands was a folded note. She passed it to him. "Don't fix the fence, not yet." That night, Juniper handed him another page. This time, it was not a drawing. It was a list, written in a mix of block letters and cursive curves. He kept the door locked. I wasn't allowed to cry. The basement smelled like bleach. My real name isn't Annie. Owen sat down at the table, the paper trembling in his hand. He didn't ask for more, didn't demand the rest. He just stayed. And beside the list, Juniper had written one final line. "I don't want to be a ghost anymore." He looked up the stairs, then at the music box still resting quietly on the shelf. And for the first time he whispered, not to her, but to himself, "Then I won't let you vanish. Not now, not ever." The frost held its grip on Northfield, but something had changed, not in the temperature, not in the way the trees leaned in silence, but in the way the silence began to bloom. Inside the cabin, Juniper stood barefoot on the wooden floor, charcoal dust clinging to her fingertips. A long roll of butcher paper stretched across the living room, taped at the corners. Her drawings now told different stories. Not just locked doors and shadows. Now there were windows with morning light pouring in, hands passing bread, a girl planting something small, a man kneeling to help, and always, somewhere in the corner, a sunflower reaching higher than anything else. Owen didn't interrupt. He swept sawdust from the doorway, quietly sanding the frame to the old greenhouse. He watched her out of the corner of his eye. He didn't ask what the drawings meant, because he already knew. That afternoon a knock came at the door, not the sheriff, not paperwork. A woman stood on the porch in a red scarf, her coat streaked with melting snow. She carried no clipboard, just a worn canvas bag that hung like it had weight beyond folders. Owen opened the door. "Marla?" She nodded. "You called. I came." Juniper stood behind him, her body half hidden by the doorway, her eyes locked onto Marla like they were measuring her soul. Owen knelt beside her. "She's here because I asked her to be, just to talk. That's all." Juniper didn't move, but after a pause, she stepped back, and that was trust. Marla didn't ask questions. She didn't pry or pull out forms. She sat on the floor beside Juniper, legs crossed, palms resting open on her knees, like someone who knew the language of waiting. They stayed like that for nearly half an hour. Then Juniper slid something across the floor, a drawing, charcoal on soft parchment, a sunflower growing from cracked dry earth. Beneath it, in small curved letters, "Things grow again if you water them." Marla stared at it, then looked up at Owen. "She's telling us everything we need to know." That night, after Juniper had gone upstairs, Marla sat at the table with a cup of peppermint tea and a thin file from her bag. "She's not Annie," she began. "I know," Owen said. "Her real name is Juniper Elena Ray. She was placed with a man named Darren Pike 11 months ago, under a temporary name change, illegal but overlooked. No school record, no medical record, last social worker assigned to her case resigned." Owen clenched his jaw. "How did no one check?" Marla looked down. "Because sometimes systems are built to move kids, not protect them." There was no anger in her voice, just grief with edges. "I filed an emergency guardianship request," she said. "If approved, she stays here until the hearing. No one can take her in the meantime. She already belongs here." "I know," Marla said softly, "but now we make it official." The next morning, Juniper placed something on the windowsill before Owen came down the stairs. A sunflower seed, wrapped in brown paper. Beside it, one word written in pencil. Theo. Owen didn't ask. Some names don't need explanations. He folded the paper, placed it in his wallet, next to Lila's hospital bracelet, and whispered, "We'll plant it together." That day, they returned to the greenhouse. It had been his father's once, before the roof caved in and the glass fogged over with time. It smelled like damp wood and dirt that had forgotten what spring felt like. But Juniper didn't flinch. She stepped into the center of the space, held out both hands, and whispered a hum. The same hum she used to make when she thought no one was listening. But this time, Owen heard it, and he hummed with her. They worked for hours. Dust turned to movement. Cobwebs to corners of potential. They swept, hammered, patched glass with care. And Juniper never stopped moving. She drew a blueprint of the beds, marked the corners with names. Hope, belonging, stay. At dusk, a car pulled up. A courier. Marla opened the letter on the porch, wind tugging at the edges. She read it once, then looked up. "The court approved the guardianship," she said. "She's yours." Owen didn't respond. He looked toward the greenhouse, where Juniper stood in the doorway, backlit by fading gold. She didn't run. She didn't speak. She walked up to him, took his hand, and whispered, not written, not mouthed, but whispered, "Thank you." It was quiet, barely audible, but it was everything. Spring didn't arrive in Northfield with thunder or color. It came on quiet feet. Snowbanks melted like they were never meant to last. The creek whispered again behind the cabin, threading through the woods like it was remembering how to sing. And for the first time in years, the wind didn't carry cold. It carried promise. Inside the greenhouse, Juniper knelt in the soil, sleeves rolled, hair tied with twine, humming softly. Owen was beside her, transplanting time with careful fingers. "I think they know," she said suddenly. Not loud, but clear. He looked up. "Know what?" She pressed the soil gently around a sunflower shoot. "That they're home." Owen swallowed hard, the lump in his throat older than this moment. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Word of the guardianship spread quietly, just enough to keep the wolves away. Darren Pike never showed. No lawyer, no argument, no letter. It was as if the only thing he had ever wanted was control, not care. And once it slipped from his hands, he didn't bother chasing it. But Juniper didn't belong to no one anymore. Each morning, she chose Owen. She sat beside him at breakfast. She tied twine around beanstalks. She helped sweep the greenhouse floors. And in the late evenings, after cocoa and stories and listening to music boxes without fear, she added new drawings to the walls. A map of the woods with names instead of trails. Trust. Shelter. Don't look back. Stay. She never stopped humming. But now it wasn't a survival sound. Now it was memory. Now it was hers. One day she handed Owen a drawing. 2 figures beneath towering sunflowers. One tall, one small. Behind them stood a tree with 3 names carved into the bark. Lila, Juniper, Owen. He traced the names with his thumb. "She never met you," he said quietly. "But I think she would have loved you." Juniper tilted her head. "I already know," she said. "You love her the same way you love me." Owen closed his eyes. And for the first time in years, it didn't ache. The final hearing came on a warm Thursday in late May. The courtroom was plain, but Juniper filled it with color, green dress, sunflower sketchbook, and a quiet calm that made even the judge lean forward. She handed him a page. On it, in neat handwriting, "This is what it looks like when someone stays." The judge looked from the page to Owen. "You understand what this means, Mr. Walker?" He nodded. "I do." "You accept full guardianship as her parent, in every sense." Owen placed a hand over his heart. "I already am." The gavel fell. There was no applause. Only stillness, the kind that comes not with noise, but with peace finally arriving where pain used to live. That night, back at the greenhouse, Juniper placed something into the soil beside the tallest sunflower. It was the seed packet. Wrinkled, sun-faded, still labeled in her handwriting, Theo. Next to it, she planted a small wooden tag Owen had carved with his pocket knife. One word burned into the grain. Stay. She turned to him, the firelight of dusk dancing in her eyes. "Do you think he knows?" she asked. "Who?" "Theo. That he helped." Owen knelt beside her, hands in the dirt. "I think he always knew. That's why the seed found you." She smiled, then whispered, "Let's make sure something beautiful keeps growing from it." He touched her shoulder, and for the first time, Owen made a promise aloud that didn't tremble in his chest. "I'm not going anywhere, not ever." That night, Juniper placed one last gift on the windowsill of the cabin. It was the music box. She hadn't mentioned it in weeks, but now she wound it slowly. The melody, soft, imperfect, unchanged, filled the room. She stood behind Owen, the music wrapping around them like a second fire. "Let's teach it a new meaning," she whispered. He nodded, then reached for the shelf, placing the box between the book they first read together and the photo of Lila in her boots. "It means home now," he said. And this time, they didn't need to say anything else. They didn't build a school. They didn't start a charity. They built something smaller and maybe stronger. A place where silence was not feared. Where names were not changed. Where voices could return, one word at a time. They called it the Quiet House. Not because no one spoke, but because everything spoken there was chosen. Children came one by one. Some with bruises they didn't explain. Some with names they didn't trust. Some with hearts wrapped so tightly in silence, even a whisper felt dangerous. They weren't asked to talk. They were given soil. Each child received a planter box. No rules, no deadlines. Some grew beans. Some drew in the dirt. One boy filled his patch with stones because, as he said, rocks don't ask questions. But Juniper always found the seeds that needed the most light. She painted the walls with forests and constellations. She taught the children how to draw trees with names carved in the trunks, and on the far wall, Above the east-facing window that caught the first light of day, she painted a sunflower so tall it stretched into the beams. In the center of its bloom she wrote, "Listen until it grows." Owen often watched her from the garden path. Not to protect her, not to supervise, just to marvel. She wasn't the girl from the woods anymore. She was the voice that stayed, the silence that chose to heal, the gardener of all the things once forgotten. Years later, long after his beard had gone white and his hands grew slower with age, Owen returned to the greenhouse alone one evening. The sun was low. The door creaked. Inside, everything was still. On the old bookshelf, between the secret garden and a worn photograph of Lila in her boots, sat a single music box. He wound it. Slowly. The tune played. Not sad, not scared, just home. And in that quiet, surrounded by blooms, Owen smiled. Because even now, long after the words had been spoken, after the sunflower had risen, after the child had chosen to stay, he could still hear her voice. Clear as spring, soft as truth. Thank you for not asking.